After several days of driving, we finally arrived at the boundary between Utah and Arizona. We arrived earlier than expected, and I decided to check out the Lone Cone Recreation Area for a future trip. A short distance up the highway is the turnoff to a lookout, providing spectacular views to Lake Powell and the surrounding countryside. Definitely worth the effort. Before crossing the Glen Canyon Dam and entering Page is the Lake Powell Interpretive Center, an important stop in providing much needed information of the surrounding area. After checking our permits at the Interpretive Center, we decided to take some time out and venture out onto the dam. Several years ago, we paddled this section of the Glen Canyon, starting just below where the inflatable rafts are located. The Glen Canyon route begins below the dam and ends at Lee's Ferry, and is considered a relatively short trip, approximately 27 miles in length, and flowing through deep canyons and past unique rock formations, with very little current to contend with. And when visiting Page, Antelope Canyon is a must-see on your bucket list. It is well worth the time and effort. Antelope Canyon has two distinct sections. The upper section set aside for guided tours and the lower section for self-guided tours. And for self-guided trips, there's a parking lot situated at the entrance to the reservation where people can park. We opted for a guided tour and were picked up in town and taxied out to the canyon. As we get close, you can see the narrow entrance of the canyon. It is truly a magical place. Please see for yourself. Once our tour was over, we were off to Zion National Park. And within a short time, we ran into the thunderstorm our guides had been talking about during the morning. And often, with the enormous amounts of precipitation, the ground becomes unable to absorb the amount of water falling, creating swollen rivers and streams, and also the occasional waterfalls. After the rain, and most often the case, the desert becomes transformed in an explosion of color and vegetation comes alive, blooming flowers and everything covered with green. As we enter Zion National Park, the weather hasn't really changed, but we still see endless signs of flooding all along the highway. And to our surprise, there were still large numbers of campers and hikers in the park, with no room for us to find a place to stay. I guess it's off to Vegas. Later that day, we found out on the radio that several hikers had died as a result of the weather conditions within the park. Continuing south from Zion, We passed the Virgin River adjacent to the interstate, usually completely dry, but today is in full flood and stranding unwary hikers on the other side. After all of this, we're looking forward for something completely different.
Viva Las Vegas! Viva Las Vegas!
Vegas, what can one say? We thought it would be something different before we headed up to Lake Tahoe. We've now had our fun in Vegas. Now time to head north to Lake Tahoe. Our first stop, and very unexpectedly, was at the turnoff for Area 51. Yes, brothels, 24/7. Who would have known? To be an extraterrestrial visiting Earth? Wonder if E.T. got any freebies. From here, we headed north along the eastern side of the Sierra Nevadas, passing by small western desert towns with probably a very colorful past. We then started to head west, climbing over a mountain range and arriving at Mono Lake. From here, we continued north. This was our first time to Lake Tahoe, and while the scenery was gorgeous, we could also see that this area could get very crowded during the season. Well, Lake Tahoe marked the end of our trip. Now it's time to head home, straight up I-5 to Victoria. After crossing the border, we were treated to a ferry ride and a chance to relax before getting home.